Hello, my sleepy little warriors. Yesterday, I was thinking about the most generous guy from our childhood, and I bet you all have also found him very kind and generous to our little hero, Harry Potter. And you must have guessed it by now. It was Professor Dumbledore. But have you ever wondered what made him this kind to Harry? Why Harry was his favorite student, and how Harry is linked to his past. Let's dive into our today's curiosity-driven episode of the entire history of Professor Dumbledore. Let's dive straight into it. The wind outside the old castle windows hums like a lullaby tonight. Imagine candlelight flickering against the tall stone walls. The faint echo of rain touching glass. Somewhere far below, the lake breathes in slow ripples, reflecting 1,000 tiny points of light. That's where our story begins. Not in greatness, not in battle, but in quiet memory. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore was once simply Albus, a boy with two long sleeves and hair that refused to behave, living in the modest home of mold on the wold. He had a habit of staring at stars as if they were puzzle pieces meant only for him to solve. His mother, Kendra, was stern but kind. His father, Percival, a man of fiery temper who loved his children more than his own freedom. And Ariana, sweet, fragile Ariana, was the heart that held them together until the world took its cruelty out on her. It was an ordinary afternoon when the Muggle boys cornered her by the garden wall. They didn't understand what she was, only that she was different. The frightened burst of magic that escaped her left them stunned and angry, and in their fear, they hurt her. Albus never forgot the sound of her cries or the wild terror in his father's eyes when he found her. Percival struck back at the boys, and for that, he was taken away to Azkaban. He never told the ministry why. Better to be branded violent than let them discover Ariana's secret. From that moment on, silence settled over the Dumbledore house like snowfall. Kendra moved them to Godric's Hollow, where whispers were fewer and neighbors kind enough to mind their own business. There, Albus grew into brilliance. Letters from Hogwarts calling him one of the most gifted students of his generation. Yet every letter he sent home carried apology in its ink. wanted to fix what life had broken, to become powerful enough to undo sorrow itself. But magic cannot mend innocence lost. When his mother died in one of Ariana's uncontrolled outbursts, Albus returned home, no longer a boy, but not yet the man he would become. He was clever, ambitious, burning for purpose. And then he met Gellert Grindelwald. Bathilda Bagshot's garden was heavy with summer that year, the air thick with roses and possibility. Gellert arrived like a storm, disguised as sunlight, hair golden, laughter sharp as glass. In him, Albus found a mirror for his restless mind. Together they dreamed of remaking the world. No more hiding, no more fear. Wizards would guide muggles for the greater good. The phrase was Gellert's, but Albus repeated it as though it were salvation. They spent nights tracing constellations, talking of hollows and immortality, sketching futures where pain was forbidden. Yet in the quiet hours, when Ariana whimpered upstairs, Albus felt the tremor of guilt. Ambition hummed louder than duty until Aberforth confronted them. Words turned to shouts, shouts to spells, and in one blinding second of tangled magic, Ariana fell. Silence again. Only this time, it screamed. Albus knelt beside her, his wand trembling, Gellert's laughter turning to horror before he fled. Aberforth wept and struck his brother, and Albus did not fight back. The world that had promised greatness shattered into ash. Years later, he would tell Harry that his own heart had been too full of selfish dreams. What he meant was that genius without compassion is a curse. From that night, he carried his sister's death like a hidden scar. It whispered to him whenever he looked at a student's bright face or heard laughter in the great hall. It told him never again. He buried himself in study, then in teaching. Hogwarts became his redemption. To those who saw only the twinkle behind his glasses, he was kindness itself. Few knew that every act of mercy was a prayer for forgiveness. Decades slipped by. Wars rose and fell. When news spread of a dark wizard amassing power in Europe, Grindelwald, Albus hesitated to act. Love and guilt are heavy chains. Only when the fires of Nurmengard burned too brightly did he finally face him. Their duel was legend, lightning against shadow, the echo of everything they had once dreamed. When it ended, Gellert lay defeated, and Albus stood among ruins, his victory hollow as the wind through broken glass. He never spoke of it again, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, Fox would sing a lament that sounded very much like memory. Years later, another darkness rose. Tom Riddle, clever and cold, twisting charm into cruelty. Dumbledore recognized the hunger in the boy's eyes. He had once seen it in his own reflection. He watched, guided, warned, and failed to stop the inevitable. When Voldemort fell and the name of Harry Potter first entered the world, Dumbledore felt the wheel of fate turning once more. He found the baby among the ruins of Godric's Hollow, the lightning-shaped wound glowing faintly against pale skin. Beside him lay the bodies of Lily and James, and in their stillness, Dumbledore read the story of a mother's final spell. Love, old, ancient, selfless, had done what all his power could not, defeated death. He placed the child on the Dursleys' doorstep not because he wished him pain, but because safety often looks cruel to those who don't see the whole board. Blood magic bound the boy to his mother's sister. Protection required distance. Dumbledore knew the burden of being extraordinary too young. From then on, he became the unseen guardian. Letters to Arabella Figg, quiet spells over Privet Drive, a watchful eye in the shape of a tabby cat across the street. He waited until the time was right, until 11 candles could be lit on a cake shaped like destiny. When Harry finally stepped into the great hall, wide-eyed beneath the enchanted ceiling, Dumbledore felt an ache that was part pride, part fear. The Sorting Hat's song ended. The child looked toward the staff table, and for a moment, Their gazes met. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the echo of an old promise. He would teach this boy courage, but more than that, he would teach him mercy, because someday mercy would save them all. The years that followed were a tapestry of trials. The Philosopher's Stone, the Basilisk, the Triwizard Tournament. Through every danger, Dumbledore allowed Harry the freedom to choose, even when choice meant pain. He remembered too well the price of imposing will upon others. Late at night, in the circular office that smelled of lemon drops and parchment, he would sit beneath the ticking instruments and whisper to Fox, "He reminds me of her," he'd say, meaning Lily, meaning Ariana, meaning every soul he had ever failed. He reminds me that love is stronger than any curse. Sometimes he dreamt of the Hallows again, the wand he held, the stone he refused to use, the cloak that now belonged to Harry. They had been symbols of mastery once, but to Dumbledore, they had become lessons. The wand taught restraint. The stone taught loss. The cloak taught humility. Together they formed the truth he had sought his whole life, that conquering death was less important than cherishing life. As the new war darkened the world, he saw shadows moving faster than hope. Voldemort returned. Fear spread like frost. Dumbledore's hands began to tremble from the curse of the ring he had dared to destroy. He knew his time was shortening, yet there was work to finish. The boy must learn to face the serpent alone. He confided in Snape, whose bitterness was armor for grief. When the time comes, Dumbledore told him, you must be the one. Snape's eyes burned, but he agreed. Dumbledore's calm that night came not from courage, but from surrender. Death, he had learned, was not defeat. It was returning home. And when the green flash lit the astronomy tower, he was already halfway to peace. But the story does not end with a fall. Harry carried his mentor's wisdom like a lantern through the dark. Each decision, each act of mercy, was Dumbledore's voice echoing within him. Even at King's Cross, between life and death, The old wizard's smile held the warmth of dawn. No titles, no grandeur, just forgiveness. Now the castle sleeps again, the portraits murmuring gentle gossip, the suits of armor breathing dust. Somewhere in the headmaster's office, the new portraits hang beside the old. Fox has flown, but sometimes, when the light hits the window just right, a single crimson feather drifts down upon the desk. It waits there, glowing faintly, as if listening for footsteps that will never return. And in the silence, you can almost hear a whisper. "Good night, Harry." The rain has thinned to a hush against the castle windows. Somewhere deep in the corridors, a clock its way toward midnight, and the fire in the narrator's room settles into a slow heartbeat of embers. So, where were we? Ah, yes. After the fall of darkness and the flight of the phoenix, the world kept turning. Headmaster Aldrin returned, not in body, but in the memory of everyone who had ever walked beneath those arched ceilings. His name was whispered the way wind moves through autumn leaves, gentle, inevitable, everywhere. But before he was a portrait on a wall, he had been a man trying to set the world right. Long before the boy named Harlan arrived at North Spire Academy, Aldrin had wandered the world alone. He traveled through ruined towers where magic clung like cobwebs, through valleys where the air still shimmered from forgotten duels. He was searching for something, not power, not even redemption exactly, but a reason to believe that wisdom mattered. He found it, oddly enough, in a village of fishermen at the edge of the eastern sea. They called him Teacher, even before he had taught them anything. They had no wands, no grimoires, only nets and songs that timed the tides. Yet their lives were full of quiet magic, the kind that comes from care. Aldrin stayed a year. He mended boats, taught letters to children, and learned what it meant to be useful without being grand. When he finally returned to the north, the world was colder, but his heart less so. He rebuilt the academy, not as a monument to power, but as a sanctuary for misfits. The stone corridors, once designed for rivalry, now held laughter, and the dueling hall became a library. It was there, one winter morning, that Harlan arrived, thin, curious, his eyes reflecting storms he did not yet understand. The boy had grown up among ordinary folk who feared the strange surges of light that sparked from his fingertips when he dreamt. His parents had sent a letter sealed in wax and worry. Please teach him how not to be afraid of himself. Aldrin accepted without hesitation. He saw something in the child that tugged at every promise he'd ever made. Maybe it was the way Harlan listened before he spoke, or how he apologized to furniture when he bumped into it. There was gentleness in the boy, the kind that power usually crushes first. Aldrin vowed to protect that gentleness. Their lessons were slow, patient. Instead of starting with spells, Aldrin took Harlan to the aviary to feed the owl cats. Magic, he said, handing him a bit of meat, isn't the lightning. It's the waiting before the strike. The boy nodded, not really understanding, but the words settled somewhere deep. Days became seasons. Harlan grew taller, surer, though a certain sadness lingered in him like mist at dawn. He often asked about the wars before his birth, the ones that had scorched the plains and darkened the stars. Aldrin rarely spoke of them, but on quiet evenings, he would tell pieces. How pride had turned friends into foes. How mercy had saved more souls than any spell. One night, while the snow climbed the windowsills, Harlan asked, "Headmaster, why do you always forgive people who wrong you?" Aldrin smiled, the tired smile of one who has seen too much. "Because I remember what it was like not to be forgiven," he said. From that night on, Harlan carried the answer the way others carry a talisman. Whenever anger rose in him, he would picture Aldrin's calm, the silver in his beard glowing against the firelight. Years passed. The world beyond North Spire stirred again. Rumors of a new shadow traveled through taverns and markets. Someone gathering relics from the old wars. Someone who spoke of finishing what darkness had begun. The Council of Mages begged Aldrin to lead them once more, but he refused. "I have already seen what happens when old men mistake fear for duty," he told them. Let the young face this new dawn. Still, destiny has a way of ignoring refusals. One afternoon, as Harlan was practicing wind spells in the courtyard, a messenger hawk fell from the sky, its wings torn by frost. The scroll it carried was bound in black ribbon, the mark of the High Archive. Aldrin read it in silence, his eyes darkening line by line. The vault of mirrors has been broken, he said at last. And something that should never have been found is free. Harlan watched him, sensing the shift in the air, that strange hush before a storm. "Will you go?" he asked. Aldrin folded the parchment and placed it into the fire. "No," he said quietly. "We will." That night, they left the castle under a moon as pale as paper. The road stretched through forests that whispered with memory. Harlan carried a small pack. Aldrin only his staff. They walked mostly in silence, the rhythm of their footsteps matching the pulse of distant thunder. After 2 days, they reached the foothills where the vault had stood. Once, it had been a monastery of mirrors, built by an order who believed reflection to be a path to truth. Now, it was a wound in the mountain. The stone blackened, air smelling of metal and sorrow. Inside, shards of silver glass littered the floor. Each fragment showed a different memory. Faces, skies, lost hours. As Harlan stepped closer, one shard flickered to life, showing a boy who looked almost like him, but with eyes full of rage. The image moved, reaching toward him, and Aldrin pulled him back. "Be careful," he warned. "The vault doesn't show what was. It shows what could be." From the darkness beyond the broken altar came a whisper, a voice older than dust. "Aldrin," it breathed, "you left me here." The boy froze. "Who is that?" Aldrin's face had gone ashen. "An echo," he murmured. "A mistake I thought I buried." The air rippled. A figure stepped forward. His mirror, younger, prouder, eyes blazing with the same blue fire that once sought to rule the world. It smiled, cruelly gentle. "You built wisdom on my bones," the shade said, "and called it redemption." Harlan could barely breathe. He watched as the two versions of the same man faced each other, time folding in on itself. "I am not your prisoner," the shade hissed. "You need me. Without ambition, you would still be a fisherman patching nets." Aldrin raised his staff, but not to attack. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but I would have been at peace." The shade lunged. The staff met it mid-air. Light erupted. Not violent, but blindingly pure. For a heartbeat, Harlan saw both men, the old and the young, merging like two halves of a single soul. Then the light folded inward and was gone. When the silence returned, only Aldrin remained, leaning heavily on his staff. His eyes looked decades older. "What happened?" Harlan whispered. "I forgave him," Aldrin said. "It's harder than killing." They walked out of the ruin as dawn touched the peaks. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Back at the academy, Aldrin said little of the journey. Classes resumed. Laughter filled the halls again, and the story of the vault faded into rumor. Yet those who looked closely could see that something in the headmaster had changed. He laughed more easily now, but his silences were deeper, as if each pause contained a prayer. Harlan continued to study, not for glory, but for understanding. He learned that magic, like forgiveness, required surrender. He learned that even the wisest among them were still learning. On the day he graduated, the great hall overflowed with lanterns. Aldrin handed him a small book bound in weathered leather. "For when you teach others," he said. Inside were no spells, only blank pages. On the first, in Aldrin's neat hand, was a single line: "Write what you learn when you fail." That night, Harlan placed the book by his bed and listened to the distant call of a phoenix somewhere beyond the cliffs. He smiled, knowing some legacies never die. They simply find new hearts to live in. And far above the sleeping castle, the stars seemed to whisper approval. Years passed like pages turning in a book that no one realized they were writing. The world beyond North Spire shifted again, quietly at first, like the rustle of a cloak before a storm. Kingdoms rebuilt themselves, old treaties cracked, and magic, ever restless, began to stir in strange new ways. news. Harlan had left the academy, but never left Aldrin's teachings. He traveled east to study the healing arts under the seers of Careth Vale. Then south to the iron markets, where runes were forged into coins, and language itself was currency. Everywhere he went, he found echoes of Aldrin's lessons in the unlikeliest of places. When a healer offered her last potion to save a stranger, he saw Aldrin. When a merchant chose fairness over profit, he heard that soft voice again. Magic is not the lightning, it's the waiting before the strike. But wisdom, as Aldrin once said, invites challenge. One evening in the coastal city of Ureth, Harlan encountered a woman named Saris. She wore the robes of a wanderer, eyes sharp as cut glass, and carried a staff edged with marks that pulsed faintly blue. She watched him as he demonstrated a levitation charm for a group of children, and then said quietly, "You practice old magic." He smiled. "All magic is old. We only rediscover it." Her mouth quirked in amusement. "Perhaps. But there are kinds best left forgotten." She told him of a movement growing in the east. Mages who sought to erase the boundary between will and world, claiming that restraint was a relic of weakness. They called themselves the Mirror-born, and they believed that to hesitate was to waste divinity. Harlan listened, unease threading through his chest. "And you?" he asked. "I was one of them," Sarah said, "until I realized mirrors don't reflect truth, only desire." They traveled together after that. Her cynicism, a foil to his quiet hope, where Harlan saw potential, she saw risk. Where she saw corruption, he saw pain. Yet together they began to understand that both were right, and both were blind. As months slipped by, news reached them that North Spire had dimmed. "Aldrin," they said, had fallen ill. The fire that had once been his eyes now burned faintly, and sometimes he forgot the names of students he'd taught for decades. Arlen returned at once. The castle loomed on the horizon like a memory made of stone. Inside, the air smelled of parchment and time. He found Aldrin in his study. Sunlight scattered across the desk in soft gold patterns. The old man looked smaller now, his hair white as frost, his staff resting beside him like an old friend. "Ah," Aldrin said, smiling weakly. "You took your time." Arlen knelt beside him. "You told me once that journeys must be walked, not hurried." Aldrin laughed, the sound like dry leaves stirring. "So I did. For days." Arlen remained by his side, reading aloud from the blank book Aldrin had given him years before, now filled with stories of failure, forgiveness, and the strange victories that came from both. The headmaster listened, eyes half closed, as though the words were music. On the seventh night, when the moon hung like a lantern over the towers, Aldrin spoke softly. "Do you know why I built North Spire here, on this cliff?" Arlen shook his head. "Because beneath us lies a river of sleeping fire," Aldrin said. "Ancient, slow, patient. It reminds me that everything powerful should rest before it rises." He reached for Harlan's hand, his fingers frail but steady. "There's a place below the library, sealed long ago. When I'm gone, you must go there. Not for power, for understanding." Then his hand relaxed, and the light in the room seemed to bend toward silence. The headmaster of North Spire was gone. The morning lasted 7 days. Bells tolled through fog and rain. Students left flowers and letters at the base of his portrait, where his painted eyes seemed to glimmer with the same calm pride as ever. When the halls finally quieted, Harlan did as he'd been told. He descended the spiral stairs beneath the library, torchlight flickering against walls carved with constellations. At the bottom lay a door of obsidian, untouched by dust. Upon it were words in Aldrin's handwriting. Truth humbles before it heals. The door opened at his touch. Inside was not a chamber, but a vast cavern. Rivers of molten light flowed between pillars of crystal. At the center stood a pool, its surface like liquid glass. Floating above it was Aldrin's staff, spinning slowly, humming with memory. As Harlan approached, the air thickened with warmth. Images flared across the pool. Aldrin as a boy, arguing with his own teacher. Aldrin holding the first brick of the academy. Aldrin standing before the ruined vault of mirrors. Each memory a lesson, each mistake an offering. Then came one last vision of Aldrin placing his hand over his heart, whispering, "To forgive is to live twice." The staff lowered gently into Harlan's grasp. For a heartbeat, he felt everything. The years of joy, sorrow, failure, triumph, all folded into one steady pulse. It wasn't power he inherited, it was responsibility. When he returned to the surface, the dawn was breaking. The sea roared below, and the castle's windows caught the first gold of morning. He stood there a long while, feeling the weight of the staff, the warmth of the rising sun, and the quiet certainty that he was not alone. In the years that followed, Harlan became North Spire's new headmaster. Under his care, the academy changed again. The dueling halls became gardens. The Tower of Records became a conservatory of living light. And once a year, on the night of Aldrin's passing, he opened the doors of the cavern below and let the students see the river of fire not as danger, but as a promise that even what burns can illuminate. Saris returned often, her cynicism softened into humor. "You've become him," she would tease. Harlan would smile. "No, he became us." And in the quiet moments, when he stood by the old portrait in the hall, he could swear the painted eyes watched him with pride. Or perhaps it was only the reflection of the torchlight. Either way, it was enough. Time went on. The world outside grew wilder, and new generations came and went. But within those walls, the lessons endured. Some nights, Harlan would gather the youngest students before the fire and begin the story again, the one that had shaped his life. "Hello, my sleepy little warriors," he would say, voice warm with memory. "Yesterday, I was thinking about the most generous man from my childhood. You might have heard of him, Headmaster Aldrin of North Spire. But have you ever wondered what made him so kind? Why he believed in those who couldn't yet believe in themselves? The children would lean closer, the firelight dancing in their eyes, and he would tell them of forgiveness, of mistakes, of rivers that burn and still flow toward the light. Outside, the sea would murmur against the cliffs, carrying their laughter into the endless dark, where perhaps somewhere beyond sight, Aldrin still listened. The year the sea froze was the year the first Mirrorborn came to North Spire. It began quietly. A letter sealed in silver arrived one winter morning, its wax stamped with the symbol of two interlocking eyes. Harlan recognized it At once, Ceres had warned him that the Mirrorborn were reforming under a new leader, one who spoke softly of unity, but dreamed of dominion. He read the letter by the firelight. Its words shimmered like heat on ice. We seek knowledge, not conquest. We seek reflection, not war. You taught that truth humbles before it heals. Let us meet and heal the world together. Harlan closed the letter slowly. The language of peace, he murmured, always sounds most convincing before the storm. Ceres entered the study, travel cloak damp with snow. You're thinking of going? He nodded. If we ignore them, they'll come anyway. Better to meet a shadow while it still calls itself light. That night, under a moon sharp as a blade, Harlan rode out beyond the cliffs. The air was brittle, every breath a ghost. He traveled east until dawn bled across the plains, revealing a camp of silver tents that shimmered as if woven from mist. Waiting there was a figure in a hooded robe. When the wind lifted the hood, Harlan saw a face both young and ageless, framed by pale hair that glowed faintly blue. Welcome, Headmaster, the stranger said. I am Kale. You may call me Reflection, if you prefer. Names are mirrors, Harlan replied. They show more than they hide. Kale smiled. Then let us speak plainly. You teach restraint. I teach release. You teach forgiveness. I teach selfhood. Both paths lead to power. The question is, whose world will it be when we arrive? Harlan studied him. The world belongs to those who care for it. Care. Kale's smile turned thin. No. The world belongs to those who dare to change it. He stepped closer, and for a moment Harlan saw flickers of other faces behind Kale's. Dozens, hundreds, as if every mirror-born soul peered through the same skin. The air around him pulsed like the heart of a storm. You built your academy On fire, Kale said softly. We'll build ours on truth. And when your cliffs crumble, we'll be there to collect the stones. Before Harlan could speak, Kale dissolved into mist. Only the echo of his voice remained. When you're ready to stop hiding behind forgiveness, look into the glass. Harlan returned to North Spire with silence pressed tight around him. He told Ceres only what mattered, that the Mirror-born had found a leader who could bind their hunger into purpose. He carries too many souls, Harlan said. If one breaks, they all fall. So we break him first, Ceres said simply. But Harlan shook his head. Breaking him means breaking them. There must be another way. Weeks passed. The river beneath the cliffs rumbled in its sleep, as though sensing the tension above. Students whispered about lights moving on the horizon, cold, colorless, too steady to be stars. Then came the night of glass rain. The storm arrived without thunder. Shards of ice fell from a cloudless sky, each piece reflecting strange images. A child's laughter, a battlefield, a burning tower. When they struck the ground, they melted into smoke that whispered names. Names of the living, names of the dead. At dawn, a single mirror stood outside the gates of North Spire. No frame, no pedestal, just a perfect oval of liquid silver. When Harlan approached, the surface rippled and revealed Kale's face. Time to choose, the reflection said. Choose what? Harlan asked. To look away or to see? The mirror cracked. From its center stepped a girl no older than 16, eyes wide with terror. She stumbled forward and collapsed. Harlan caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold as moonlight, her pulse faint, but real. When she awoke in the infirmary, she whispered one word before fainting again. Help. Ceres leaned over her. A mirror-born defector. Or a message, Harlan said. When the girl finally recovered enough to speak, she told them what she'd seen. A ritual deep in the frozen plains, where Kale planned to merge every mirror-born consciousness into one vast mind. He says it will end loneliness, she whispered, that we'll all become one soul without pain or doubt. But the ones who resist disappear. Harlan's hands tightened around the bed rail. Disappear where? The girl looked away. Into the mirrors. They scream, but no one hears. He rose. Then we'll hear them. By midwinter, the mirror-born army had gathered around the ruins of the Vault of Mirrors, the same place where Aldrin had once faced his younger self. Harlan felt the irony like a blade under the ribs. Fate, it seemed, enjoyed repetition. He led only a small group: Ceres, the girl named Lyra, and 3 of the Academy's most steadfast mages. We're not going to win, Harlan told them as they approached the wasteland. We're going to understand. Ceres smirked. That's your version of a battle cry. They reached the vault at dusk. The sky was bruised purple, the air trembling with energy. Thousands of mirror-born stood in silent rows, their faces expressionless, eyes glowing faintly blue. At their center, Kale raised his hands. Welcome, reflection, he called. You've come to join us. I've come to remind you, Harlan said, that unity without choice is tyranny. Choice is an illusion of fear, Kale replied. Once we merge, there will be no fear. Harlan stepped forward, staff in hand. And no love. Kale hesitated, just a flicker, but it was enough. Love divides, he said. Love defines, Harlan countered. Without it, all mirrors show the same emptiness. The crowd stirred, the blue light in their eyes flickering like candles in wind. For the first time, Kale looked uncertain. You can't hold them forever, Harlan said. They're not yours to keep. Kale's face hardened. Then there'll be no one's. He struck the ground. The earth split. A roar like shattering glass filled the air as the mirrors that lined the ruins burst into light. Threads of silver shot upward, weaving a cage of brilliance around them all. Ceres shouted a spell, hurling a spear of flame that fizzled harmlessly against the dome. He's sealing us in. Harlan closed his eyes. Not sealing, reflecting. He could feel Aldrin's staff vibrating in his grip, resonating with the same energy that hummed through the mirrors. Beneath it all, the river of fire beneath the cliffs stirred, ancient and aware. He remembered Aldrin's words. Everything powerful should rest before it rises. And he whispered back, "Then rise." He drove the staff into the ground. A sound like the world inhaling filled the dome. Flames shot upward, not red, but golden, flowing through the mirrors, illuminating faces with sudden clarity. The mirror-born blinked, confusion giving way to tears. In the mirrored light, they saw not Kale's vision of perfection, but their own. Families, friends, moments of laughter, long forgotten. "No!" Kale screamed. "They're mine." But his voice fractured, split into echoes that no longer obeyed him. The mirrors turned toward him like eyes awakening. For the first time, Kale saw himself, not as leader or God, but as the lonely man who had tried to silence his pain by multiplying it. He fell to his knees. The mirrors cracked, then melted into mist. When the light faded, the army was gone. Only a few hundred remained, confused, weeping, free. Harlan lowered his staff. Saris caught his arm before he collapsed. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head weakly. "We did nothing." They remembered. The girl. Lyra looked up at the dawn breaking through the shattered dome. What happens now? Harlan smiled faintly. Now we forgive. In the months that followed, Northspire became more than an academy. It became a refuge. Former Mirrorborn came seeking healing, not absolution. Harlan taught them what Aldrin had taught him, that magic's first purpose was mercy. Saris organized the rebuilding of villages lost in the storm. Lyra, once a frightened defector, became a teacher of empathy magic. Her classes always ending with the same words. Look into the mirror only when you're ready to meet a friend. And at night, when the sea whispered beneath the cliffs, Harlan would sit by the river of fire and listen to its endless murmur. Sometimes, in the flicker of the flames, he thought he saw Aldrin's silhouette, smiling in quiet pride. Years later, when Harlan's hair had silvered and his hands trembled from age, he gathered his students for one last tale. The room was filled with warmth and candlelight, and the wind outside hummed like an old song. He began, as always, "Hello, my sleepy little warriors. Yesterday, I was thinking about the most generous man I ever knew." The young ones leaned closer, and in their eyes, he saw the same spark that had lived in Aldrin's, the same faith that mercy could outlast fear. When he finished, silence filled the hall. Not emptiness, but peace. And far below, the river of fire burned steady as ever, its glow rising through stone, through floor, through hearts, reminding all who remained that light, once kindled, never truly dies.